in the last two sessions, spent a lot of time talking about different sorts of factors within a profession or within a professional life that might yield some kinds of standards of behavior or another. We haven't said that those particular standards are good, bad, or indifferent. We haven't said they're good for society. We haven't said we like them. We've just said that when professionals are considering how they should behave, there's a number of sources of guidance. And we talked about self-interest that dictates, a certain set of principles, a certain number of things that ought to be done, or a certain way of doing things, not necessarily a number. We talked about consideration for the community, for clients. These are things that might guide the professional from within. The professional might have a genuine concern for serving the community, for doing a good job for clients, might be very proud of doing that. And that would dictate ways in which the professional should behave, sometimes in conflict with what self-interest might dictate. So don't get the impression that these several sources of standards of behavior are going to necessarily be coherent. Might be quite incoherent, pointing in all kinds of different directions. We talked about what we call logical standards that have to do with just what the profession is. And every particular profession has a certain implicit goal, or at least some things that, some guides to behavior that arise out of the very nature of the profession. And then finally, we talked about more or less romantic standards that arise out of the sense that the professional might have that her profession really reflects who they are. A person's profession need not, but can be play a big role in a person's own self-conception. It certainly plays a big role in the perception we have of other people. We think of other people as a this or a that, a policeman, a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher. But people's own self-conception, their idea of themselves, is often largely influenced by their profession. And that yields certain guides to behavior. These are all of them things that come from within the profession. And we spent 2 full sessions talking about those. I want to spend only a very small amount of time talking about the obvious sorts of pressures that come from outside the profession, or any arbitrary profession, on behavior. And then get to some more substantive issues about ethics in professional life. I guess the 3 I want to mention, I don't even want to sort of go into this too much, involve let's see if this is right. Well, just involve claims that outsiders may have on professionals with justification or not. So let's just head this. External demands or claims on professionals. First one is claims of clients. Now, not every profession necessarily takes on clients. We've defined profession in a way that's really quite broad. Some, I think, some of you, Christopher, for one, think this is a bit too broad. But we've defined it in such a broad way that not every profession will really be one in which clients, as such, are involved. But where clients are involved, there are many legitimate and then many illegitimate, but certainly many legitimate claims that clients may have. I'm a professional teacher. I represent myself as that by doing this thing before you, standing in front of the room. You come. I mean, I've never given you a certificate in which I acknowledged, a list of responsibilities and denied other ones. I've never done that, but I still have certain responsibilities. I could be held responsible in law for them. But certainly I could be held responsible for them within the institution, within RIT. Certain legitimate expectations that just follow from my representing myself to you as a teacher. The same for doctors, obviously, and lawyers. You go into a doctor's office, you expect a certain kind of behavior. You have many legitimate expectations with any professional. And these demands or claims, certainly the legitimate ones, constrain professional behavior. They are a factor from outside the profession, not the professional's own concern for clients. We talked about that one before, but now the demands that clients actually make, the claims that clients actually make on professionals. That's one thing that goes into influencing the way professionals behave and the ways they ought to behave. In other words, standards of behavior. Two, I'll just abbreviate a huge category, claims of third parties. Now this is the place where society's claims on professionals probably would have to make its entry. Again, we have considered already the concern or interest or motivation that professionals themselves might have to be beneficial, to make a contribution to society. Here, I'm talking about the claims that genuinely come from outside. Again, some of them legitimate, some of them illegitimate. The legitimate ones really do play a role in influencing what professionals come to regard as the standards of their behavior. At least they ought to. It's one of the factors from outside the profession that the professionals need to consider, if only because there's a great deal of pressure on them to take them seriously. The reason I put it this way, not just society, is because society's interests, that's a funny expression, in fact. Society's interests go every which way. I mean, society is but a collection of individuals who have different sorts of interests. And since the interests of society's particular members are sometimes in conflict, it's probably a little misleading to talk about society as if it had some unified interest. But what we do get are lots and lots and lots of interests and rights and claims and demands that are kind of owned by the individual society members. And then this whole mess, this whole lot of sometimes conflicting, sometimes harmonizing interests, demands, and needs, that becomes what we call social interest. So the best way to summarize this without, I think, blotting out all kinds of interesting problems is to just say that they're claims of third parties, not clients now, not the people that the professional enters into some kind of contractual relationship with, but other people who are affected by the behavior of the professional have legitimate claims that limit the proper behavior of professionals. And then finally, these things have been sort of vaguely social. There's law. Straightforward law. It distinguishes itself because it resorts to force. I mean, law, when we come to constraints provided by law, we come to straightforward demands, which are accompanied by penalties if the demands are not met. And those are most commonly encountered by professionals in areas of licensing, regulation of professions, and then, of course, the general laws that we're all subject to, but the professionals themselves are particularly liable to be constrained in their behavior by licensing regulation, by licensing rules and by other sorts of regulations of their industry. So here are some more factors that enter into a professional's establishing some standards of behavior, codes of ethics. As before, some of the standards that arise are straightforwardly moral or ethical. Others of them are practical, less clearly ethical, normative, or moral. But what I want to emphasize now is that in addition to all those internal sources of standards, here's these external ones to throw into the mix. And having done all that, I would suspect that the impression I've left is that this is a huge, this is an impossible, not just a big, but an impossibly big array of considerations for any poor human being to have to sort through and trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong. And that's part of the mess that I think we're in as we consider the whole area of professional ethics. There's lots of different sorts of things that people in life have to consider when they're trying to do the right thing. That's true in any area of life, and it's true in professional life especially. Professionals don't have fewer obligations than non-professionals. In a way, they have more, because they make these special implicit claims that generate rightful expectations on the part of the public. My being a doctor means that when you talk to me, even on the street, about your illness, you have a certain normal, understandable expectation of interpretation of what I say, that it will be informed, that it will have, like if I give you some advice, even informally, even not in the office, your expectation, quite understandable, is that I will be basing my recommendation on my training. Now, I'm not sure whether you could sue me for advice I gave you at a bus stop, if I'm a doctor, but there are these expectations that are generated. Any profession you can think of. Some things are written out in contracts, other things are just kind of floating there as implicit understandings that everybody has. So as one enters a professional life, one actually increases the complexity of the array of obligations you've got. You've got obligations to your employer if you're employed by somebody. You've got obligations to the public at large. You've got obligations to the particular clients. You've got all these internal factors. You want to be true to the calling. You have obligations to yourself and your family. These are all real. They're genuine obligations that people have. And this long list that we've been discussing for several days might, at this particular juncture, make things seem really quite impossible. How do you juggle all of that? Some people, and I'm going to begin to take some sides on some of the theoretical issues that we discussed earlier in the quarter. Some people would point to a consequentialist theory or perhaps a Kantian theory. They'll point to one of these theories that are supposed to, anyway, to help us generate answers to the question, what should I do? Maybe I should take into consideration all of the consequences to all of the people affected, weigh them as best I can, and make a decision about which one maximizes the greatest good for the greatest number. That would be the utilitarian answer. But it's not clear that that gives much guidance in the real-life situations that people find themselves in. There is a risk that people will understand these theories that we discussed earlier, some kind of algorithm that you could plug in the information, it would generate an answer. But given the complexity of moral situations, of situations in which people have to make ethical decisions, it seems real unlikely that any algorithm will ever do the job. Maybe they could make a computer that could generate answers to ethical questions, but it would have to be a computer that's vastly more sophisticated than any computer they've got around now. It would have to do what people have to do. It would have to make judgments. It wouldn't just be applying some kind of formula. It would have to make a judgment in the situation. A judgment that would go beyond mere application of a formula to a bunch of data. And now there's no reason to think computers couldn't do that one day, but that would be the day when computers become intelligent, if they were doing this sort of thing. So we've got situations in which there's, I've just listed some of the factors that enter into the standards that should apply to people in their normal lives, but we've been focusing attention especially on professional life. We've just listed several categories. You should not presume that we've even scratched the surface. I've tried to pick general enough categories so that lots of stuff is covered, but there's all kinds of things that go into this. There's going to be conflicts between the different demands on any person in a professional setting, and judgment, that's the key. Judgment will have to be exercised. Now, it's that setting, we didn't get to go into this before in much detail, but it's that kind of view of the normal decision-making setting that has led lots of people to favor that virtue-oriented or that character-oriented approach to ethics over rules and action-oriented approaches to ethics. Do you remember the distinction that we made when we were talking about theories? Between action-oriented, ones that said the way the road to morality is to figure out how to assess actions. Which actions are the right ones to take? And the consequentialists told us which ones to take. Which ones were they? What did the consequentialists? I'm not going to test you about this anymore, but you should know it. What did the consequentialists say was the proper way to decide what to do?
To figure out the consequences that your actions might have.
Yeah, first of all, look to the consequences and then do the one that has the best consequences. Do the thing that has the best consequences among all the options that you're presented with. And the internalists, people like Kant, rights-based theorists, they think, no, you shouldn't do those things. You should base your activities, your actions on another criterion. I'm not going to go into the details there. But they were all trying to figure out answers to the question, what should we do? And they thought that was the right approach to take to ethics. Give advice. The right thing for an ethical theory to do, according to these theorists, is to give all of us advice about how to assess acts. The virtue-based or character-based theories say, no, the thing to emphasize is not what a person should do, but what a person should be. What kind of person someone is. And the idea here is that if you are a good person, then you will be able to go into these very complicated situations, and your chances will be much better of coming up with something that's morally acceptable as a solution than someone who's sitting there with a rule book, either trying to look up the right rule or remember what the right rule is or figure out which is the rule that applies in this complicated situation, or someone who's trying to figure out what all the consequences to all the affected persons would be and assess that in some sort of imaginative calculator. The advantage, the attractiveness of these virtue-based ethical theories is that they say, we can't tell you what to do. Only a person who is a virtuous person, a morally insightful person, can really pick out the right answer in these complicated situations. There isn't a right thing to do that will really cover many more than a few situations. There's all kinds of rules that we can list. More often than not, you should be honest. You shouldn't usually steal. You shouldn't usually, we could just list a bunch of things like that. But there's always exceptions. And it takes a morally mature, sophisticated, a morally wise person, a person with the right kind of character, to be able to sort through these situations and know what to do. And what we should try to do, if we want to be moral, according to those virtue-based theories, we should try to bring our character into line with the kind of character that can do this well. I mean, that's the attractiveness of these theories, because one might otherwise become very depressed at trying to sort out. I mean, how is a simple person like me supposed to figure out what to do in these horrendously complicated situations? I mean, I can't get the information I would need to assess the consequences that the consequentialists tell me I should do. I'm not sure. I mean, there's usually many, many different principles that apply, and I'm not sure what to do when the principles come into conflict. Well, the virtue-based, I mean, I don't think that it really comes down to anything as simple as this, but the hope, the ideal of the virtue-based, character-based theories is that, well, if you got the right character, if you've got good, strong moral character, you may make wrong decisions from time to time, everybody does, but your chances are better. Your chances are best of steering through these horrendously complex situations ethically than they would be if you hadn't taken the time to try and sharpen and hone and perfect your character. Now, one thing that I think we have going for us as we, not only as we ourselves try to lead ethically decent lives, but in our expectations of other people, one thing that I think we have going for us is that it's still the case. This is my view, and I'm sure it's subject to, lots of others would disagree, and it certainly is subject to counter-argument, but in my view, it still seems to me that most people have a very, very deep desire and wish to be good people, to be decent people. They sometimes throw up their hands. How can you do that in this world? And sometimes it's out of a cynical perception that no one else cares about ethics but me. I mean, I think that's a very common thing for people to feel. I'm the only one that really is trying to do right here. Everybody else is just trying to make a fast buck. Why should I keep doing this? I don't want to feel like a chump. I think it's a fairly common feeling that people have. But I also believe that deep down, most people really want to do the right thing. I think it is as deep a part, at least as deep, maybe even a deeper part of people's self-perception, that they want to be good, they want to do things well and right, as any of those parts of the self-perception that are informed by one's profession. I mean, we talked before about how the way a person appears to others and the way they think of themselves involves the things they do, and therefore involves to a certain extent their profession. Well, maybe even more so, what we think of other people, our assessments of them, what we think they are, involves to a certain extent our perception of whether they're good people or not, whether they want to do good or not. And I think that's also true of our self-perception, our own understanding of ourselves. And so I would think that there's some hope that we can have, not only for ourselves in sorting through difficult situations professionally, but elsewhere, if we pay some attention to this idea of character, of ethical character. Now, it's not going to solve all problems. I mean, the people who have the wisest understanding of ethical situations may very well make mistakes, maybe make them frequently. Their wisdom might show itself not so much in never making mistakes, but what do they do about the fact that they've made mistakes? Do they learn from their mistakes? So there's kind of a complicated story to tell about character, but there's about a million chapters to that story, and what I want to do is try and boil it down into kind of a short version. But let me ask you, because I'm sort of puzzled as to how this sounds to you. If I were to make this assertion that the character-based theories do, that what we all should do is to strive to have the very best character possible. We should strive to have a moral character. That's what yields, in the end, right actions. How would you do that? I mean, what kind of advice is that? I mean, how could you bring it about that your character become different than what it is? Any suggestions? I mean, let's say I am a certain way. Let's say I perceive myself as somebody who's really trying basically to be as good as possible, but I know I screw up a lot. I'm not nearly as good as I ought to be, not as good as I want to be. What can I do to change?
Not really on the...
Okay, something else.
Just to comment on character in the professional world, I wouldn't say character is really promoted in the professional setting. I think that even the word professional puts everyone's character under one roof and makes it a monotone, easy to handle, malleable kind of thing. And I don't know whether, in my mind, character is an individual. Each person has their own character. There's the drive to be different. I don't think you can put that under the same setting as a professional setting.
Well, all right. I think that I think I agree with everything up to the. I mean, I don't see why that leads to a rejection of the character as having an important role to play in.
Well, what I'm saying, it's in the end, professional is the change of character. It's not the strive to be different. I'm already different.
Here, let me see if I can see if I understand what you're saying. That when you think of professionals, let's just get more specific. Let's pick out engineers. When you think of engineers, and you think of the standards of behaviors that engineers should have, or how engineers should be, one's inclination is to kind of lump them all together. Just think of them as if they were all, they're all engineers. I mean, you're thinking of a bunch of people. I mean, I don't think anybody's prepared to say that they really are all the same. But when you're thinking about some profession, or when you're thinking about professionals in general, you're not thinking of people as individuals. You're thinking of them in respect of the things that they make them resemble, that they share, that they're all similar professionals. Whereas, when you think of character and building character, you think of something that's much more individualistic. And that seems okay to me. I just don't see where. I'm trying to portray the issues, the real live issues that are the subject of ethics in general, or the subject of professional ethics in particular. I'm trying to portray them as really kind of individual issues. I mean, they're issues that individuals confront, whether they are in the midst of their professional decision making or not. I mean, I take it that there's a funny sense in which there's no such thing as professional ethics if what you mean by that is some kind of special sort of ethics that conflicts with regular ethics. I mean, my guess is that there's just ethics. We're faced with problems of situations in which we have to decide what to do, and the ethical dilemma is how can I behave rightly, or how can I know what the right thing to do is from an ethical point of view. And I think those are situations that confront individuals. And when individuals are in professional situations, that just means that we now know what the situation is. It's not like ethics sort of changes in character. It means that the details of the situations in which ethical decisions have to be made are informed by the fact that we are in a doctor's office or in a lawyer's office. Okay, so...
Well, yeah, my comment was more along the lines that the actual profession you're in often molds your character. you have no control over that in many instances. You know, even to the point where right and wrong are jaded. And
Are viewed differently.
that's right.
So
And
that in
I
some
think that's a
professions you may come to
consideration.
think, yeah.
And as far as character, I don't think you have that much control over it. Due to the fact that only you talk about engineers, and I'll talk about my own major, which is graphic design. In the end, from day one, your character's been molded to think a certain way. You can vary from that a little bit, but in the end, you've read the same books. Everyone in your major's read the same books. You've done the same things, and in the end, much of your character is much like everyone else's in your profession.
Okay, you've at the same time as explaining why you don't think it's possible for us to have control over our character,
I've somewhat answered.
you've also
but-
given the clue as to how we would do it. I mean, you've shown how, I mean, you've suggested that our character gets molded by educational institutions, for example. And it does it by immersing us in a crowd of people, all of whom are doing the same things, reading the same books, and as a matter of fact, there's guidance given about which books to read. Now, as you well know, within even the most controlled and constrained educational experiences, some people don't read those books. Some people read other books. Some people don't hang out with that crowd, that main crowd. They find another crowd to hang out with. But this isn't, I mean, what's important about what you said is this isn't avoiding having your character molded. This is taking some control over the environment in which your character is molded. And it would be steps like those, I think, that might have some chance of being effective in changing your character. What the traditional way of saying this, and it's something that's familiar to everybody, is you hang out with one crowd and your characters likely get molded one way, and you hang out with another crowd and your characters likely get molded with another way. If you're kind of eclectic, it's not like your character isn't being molded, but you're getting all kinds of different influences in there, and that's an interesting result as well. If you don't stick only with one crowd, but if you try and sort of get influences from lots of different places, that might free you to a certain extent from the monolithic influence of any one particular group. But there's a lot of things you said that really require more response than I can't even remember them right off the top of my head. The one thing my question had been though, what would you do if you wanted to try to mold your character? Well, I guess one very important thing you might do is to sort of take steps to place yourself in an environment in which that would be more likely. If you had a certain idea of the objective, like where do I want to get, you might place yourself among people who are there or who have a similar desire. Sorry. Go back if you want. You don't have to answer, if you had something to say.
Well, what I was going to say about character before might be totally off base, but I worked in a camp, and a camp director, he's considered professional. And the year before we had a camp director, and he was horrible, and then this guy comes along, and he goes from one extreme to the other as in character, and gets his entire staff motivated to do all this stuff that they were not about to do last year with the other. And they're still in the same category of both those people, but yet one character is
Both same professional category.
Right, but totally two different people. And then why would somebody want to mold their character to one character? Why wouldn't you want to be different? Why would you want to be the same all the time?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think a lot of people's we're torn. I mean, we're pulled in all different directions. But I mean, I've certainly gone in. I spent a lot of my life trying to be different. But I also know it's very lonely. And I also know how that felt, especially as an adolescent. And I think a lot of adolescents, I was just listening to a radio show the other day in which people were talking about what it's like. These were people who were born and raised in England. But one was of Turkish Cypriot parents, the other was of Greek Cypriot parents. And this was a radio interview on All Things Considered, I guess. And so you couldn't tell, I mean, they sounded English. They sounded like they were from London. But they were talking, and these were kids. They were like 14 years old, 15 years old, and they had just passed through a period when they felt They really hated their parents. They really didn't like the idea, why did I have to be Turkish? Why can't I be English like everybody else? Because of the problems that they were facing in school and stuff. And I don't know that there's any of us who hasn't from time to time really renounced some of the things that made us different. And wished that we just didn't have those things that made us different. We wish we were like everybody else. So, I mean, I don't think you have to search very much further than your own heart to find lots of evidence that sometimes we don't want to be different. We want to be like everybody else. But that doesn't deny that there's another part of us that just, just completely messes things up because we're just not consistent. Human beings just are not consistent. I think that's a wonderful virtue. But there's another part of us that says, no, I'm not like everybody else. I'm special. And resents and resists all the things that are just kind of makes you common. Now, back to the issues concerning ethics, character. I mean, the idea here is that you're supposed to, if you want to be ethical, I mean, I think the presumption is everybody is at a place where they are aware of their imperfections. And some people cover them up, but everybody in their private moments is aware of their ethical imperfections. They realize they're not quite as good as they might like to be. They sometimes feel that there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for this. There's a justification for it. I can't do that because of some constraint or another. And sometimes maybe they're right. Maybe the constraints are such that they just couldn't be more ethical than they are because they're under a gun. I mean, that's at least something that ought to be considered as a possibility. But I think, barring those extreme cases, I think all of us are aware of lots of times when there would be no real big problem in our being a bit more ethical than we were. And yet we weren't. So, what do we do? If we care, and I'm also presuming that most people care about this to a certain extent, deep down inside. If we care about becoming or being more ethical than we are, behaving better than we do, how can you go about that? And the blanket answer that traditionally is given has to do with trying to encourage certain habits and dispositions and the particular means that might be suggested to do it, or just the sorts of means that educational institutions undertake. I mean, educational institutions are institutions that, for better or for worse, are designed to mold not only minds but character. They're designed to mold beliefs. They're designed, the whole system of public education anyway, I'm not thinking about colleges so much, are designed with an eye to the benefit of society more than the particular benefit of the students. I mean, the whole rationale for having a public education system is that this is good for society. We'll get people out here who will be contributing members of society. They won't be just wandering around doing just sort of whatever they want. They'll be trained to fit into the social organism and help make it work. And the psychological side of that to the student is that there's a lot of pain involved in being fit into the social mechanism and helping to make it work. But that's kind of what it's there for. But what it does is it tries to through usually unobjectionable means, tries to present opportunities, options, tries to guide people, tries to get like-minded people together, tries to provide models that are good models. But we can do that for ourselves to a certain extent. We are in a position to alter our environment sometimes, that is, go to another place, find people who are like us in ways that are different from the ways that are sort of provided to us normally. We could have our own little circle of friends that aren't the same people that we hang out with at school. We can do all kinds of things like that. So there's things we can do that follow that same general pattern. But let me just keep the category fairly general. There are habits, dispositions that can be adjusted, and The key may be something that resembles the acquisition of skill. Now, what I'm going to do is offer you a model, an analogy. This isn't supposed to be taken too literally. It's just supposed to be something like what might be going on, according to the virtue theorists, as we try to become different. What we're trying to do is take on new habits. Now, what's a habit? It's kind of an automatic way of responding to things. New dispositions, when one is disposed to do this rather than that in a certain situation. What we're trying to do is to get ourselves in a position where we act in certain ways. So here comes action again. We're trying to get ourselves into a position where we will act in morally right ways almost automatically. And what I want to offer is this model, a model that's sort of based on the acquisition of skills, like learning how to ride a bicycle, learning how to accomplish any complex activity in sports, learning how to play a musical instrument. You start out, on the view that I'm suggesting to you, you might start out in this undertaking really having to sort of get some instruction from somebody. Like, how do you ride a bike? Well, and somebody might tell you a few things to start out trying. Now, you can't ride a bike just from that. You have to get on the bike and ride. But if you're trying to play tennis, someone might offer you suggestions about how to hold the racket, how to stand, how to move as the ball's coming toward you, things that you're trying to memorize, trying to remember. Now, these are not always easy to remember, and certainly not always easy to apply when you're trying to learn skills, whether it's piano playing or tennis playing or riding a bicycle. But what you do is you get all these principles, these rules in mind, and you start trying to apply them. Now, this bears some resemblance to what the action-based theorists, like the consequentialists and the internalists, told us to do when we're trying to figure out what's right and wrong. So maybe at the beginning, we can use some of those kinds of theories to make first approximations about what's right and what's wrong. We can try and assess the consequences to all those concerned. We can try to figure out whether a particular principle can be generalized to everybody, a particular maxim. We can use any of those rules from the action-based theorists to try and figure out what to do. But this will be sort of like novice tennis playing. What we're really trying to do is to just sort of get going, get into the game, so to speak, so that we can hone our sensitivity to ethical situations. So what I'm suggesting as a first step in the adjustment of habits and dispositions is something that's cognitive, a cognitive first step. And that cognitive first step might very well involve trying to assess consequences or the consistency of generalizing a principle to include everybody. It could involve all of them to some degree or another. We don't even have to make a choice. The point is we're trying to do something like what we tried to do when we were first learning to ski or ride a bike. We're just trying to get on the skis and get some kind of clue as to where to move first. Once we develop a pattern of making decisions, making judgments in ethical situations, rather than allowing the situations to roll over us, then I think that the next step would it's not a step so much, but another stage is like the transition. I'm going to put cognitive first step in the adjustment of habits and dispositions. And then, just for abbreviation purposes, so you'll remember what I'm trying to indicate, I'll just use novice expert as an abbreviation. There'll be a transition from this kind of stage where you're a novice at it to a stage where you're an expert. At least this is what the hope is of the character-based, virtue-based theories. If you get going, if you get going and sort of making the right kinds of decisions, then eventually it'll become easier and more natural. It'll just kind of work into your character. It'll be incorporated into your array of habits and dispositions, and more it'll come kind of automatically. You won't have to assess so much in a cognitive way all the consequences. You'll begin to kind of see how to move through ethical situations and make ethical decisions. So this particular view, and I want to warn you that it's a very limited view, and it really can't fully account for ethical character building in any substantive sense, but it's a beginning, it's one glimpse, it's one side. It offers a kind of a model. It's the skill acquisition model of becoming a better person. It suggests becoming a better person isn't a matter so much of thinking harder about ethical things. It's a matter of acquiring certain new habits and dispositions. And again, a disposition really just means a preparation, a being disposed to act in certain ways rather than others. It makes tacit reference to kind of automatic behavior. Now, one of the background ideas I'm using here in offering you the novice expert model of athletes and musicians is that, in my view, and in the view of some others, this may be contested by you as well. You need to swallow this, but in my view, being an expert pianist, a real expert, isn't just being able to do the same things that the novice does, except real fast and real smooth. I mean, the novice is following steps, is following rules, is thinking hard about how to move the fingers, and how to, and is just concentrating. There's a lot of cognitive activity on the part of the novice. Similarly, for the novice, the person who's riding a bike, they're thinking real hard about what they're doing, or playing tennis, or anything like that. When you're learning this stuff, you're following rules. Someone's given you, or cooking, someone's given you a recipe, and you're following the recipe slavishly. You're trying to get everything just exactly right. And that's when you're a novice. When you're an expert, it's not like you follow recipes, just except you do it fast. No, you take liberty with recipes, because you know what the right thing is to put into the recipe just then. And when you're an expert athlete in any particular sport, it's not just that you're following the rules real fast. Forget the rules. Rules don't mean anything to experts. They take liberties with rules because they know what's appropriate, or they feel it. I mean, it's not even knowing in the cognitive sense. They just move to the right place to make contact with the ball. It's automatic. This whole idea of what the difference is between a novice and an expert suggests that there's actually a qualitative difference. It's not just that the expert gets to do things real fast and real smooth. It's that the expert is doing things in a different sort of way than the novice does. The novice is doing a lot of cognitive assessing. The expert is automatically moving and doing the right thing. For the musician, it's the piece is leading. It's almost leading the musician on. And it's almost as if for a tennis player, that spot over there where the ball is moving is just drawing the tennis player. It's not like the tennis player is thinking or doing anything like that. They're just moving automatically. And the suggestion I offer you here is that becoming that at least this is one model of one aspect of becoming a moral person, involves kind of becoming an expert, sort of absorbing a certain pattern of behavior, making it your own, making it automatic, not thinking through consequences, not assessing things against lists of principles. But instead, doing the right thing involves cultivating a certain ethical character so that you be more and more prone to do the right thing in particular situations. Which ones are the right things? Well, those theories, the ones that had a role to play early on in the working up of, in the improvement of character, those theories have a lot to say about which things are the right things. Where they conflict, we'll have a problem in judgment. But they don't always conflict. They don't often conflict in what they specifically advise.
And so they can all be useful in telling us which are the right things at first, and then we just try and build our character. Now that's the way this whole line works. And it has, as I've emphasized, a specific limitation. But I want to pause for a second and see, just get any reactions you may have. I'm not sure whether you have any or not, but any reactions you have to this interpretation of what it is like to attempt to become more moral, build one's moral character, I guess. And is this a good sketch of moral character or behaving ethically? Any problems with it? Well, here's one that I see. At least it's a apparent problem. Might be that it could be dealt with without using the means that I'm going to suggest to you. But the better a tennis player or a pianist you become, there's no question about it. There's no real likelihood that you're going to make a massive error, unless there's some massive thing wrong. But there's just not much likelihood that you'll make a massive error at the piano as you become more and more expert, or make a massive blunder in tennis as you become more and more an expert. And yet, strangely enough, the more and more committed you are to a particular moral character, a particular behavioral disposition, the more one sets oneself up for failure if the conditions change in a radically new way. Now, at least that's something that I think is right. I'm thinking of situations in which people become fairly self-satisfied that, I have really become a moral expert here. I really have gone through this process, and I've honed my sensibilities so that I now know exactly what's right in situations. And if you ask me why those things were right, I might not be able to tell you anymore. Any more than a tennis player can tell you exactly what she did in that last play. They just moved. So that the moral expert might be just that person that we would regard as self-satisfied, unopen to learning new things, and this is a travesty of ethics. So I want to suggest to you that it's part of the story about what ethical character is and what it is like to try to lead an ethical life involves this business about trying to hone one's character, sharpen it in such a way as to become ethically sensitive. But that another side of the story has to be told a little bit differently. A really ethical person, whether in professional life or anywhere else, it seems to me has to be alert to new factors, new evidence, and in particular has to be especially alert to the possibility that they've been wrong all these years about what the right way to behave is. That there's a great danger in becoming so convinced that you are right that you think of yourself as a moral expert. That has to be modified severely. But there's a model for this too, and the model is empirical science. Scientists create theories that are as complex as you like, that are as elaborate as you like, that they are as committed to as you like. But that science anyway, it's hard to say this in general about particular scientists. Science in general, though, is not committed to any particular theories. In fact, it's committed to the idea that theories should answer to experiment, to experience. Theories that are
believed in for years and years and years, even for hundreds of years, are often overthrown in science, and science is prepared to give its most prestigious awards, the Nobel Prize, for example, to those people who successfully, persuasively show that an old theory, no matter how noble it was, no matter how long it was held, is not correct. Now, so the practice of science offers us an interesting model for morality as well. We should have the same attitude, I would think, toward trying to figure out what the right thing is, what the right thing to do is, as scientists have to the truth. Namely, the theory isn't the thing. The theory we've believed in all these years, that's not the important thing to hold our allegiance. And the character that we've built up, the beliefs we've built up about what the right things are, our intuitions about what are right and wrong in particular situations, I mean, those aren't necessarily the things that we should be wedded to in morality. We need to be more flexible than that. We need to correct our behavior on the basis of new experience, even as experts. That's part of what being an expert would be, is being able to alter one's understanding and expectations of ethical situations as one learns more. So the analog with acquiring a skill works, I think, pretty well in what might be thought of as a developmental part of being ethical, and that's ongoing. I mean, it would go on forever. You don't get to a place where you are an ethical expert, and that's the other side of the story. The other side of the story is that that there's always the possibility of error, that we have to take that into account, and there the better analogy might not be skill acquisition, but in something like the attitude that scientists take to the relationship between theory and experiment. Theories are important, but not so important as getting things right. So you don't hang on to the theory just because it's yours. You, as a matter of fact, test that theory as hard as you can, and if the tests go the wrong way, you adjust your theory, you change it. Now, I'm not sure whether these various metaphors, analogies, and models have been clear or whether they've made sense. So let me open the floor to any questions you might have or comments you might have about it. The virtue of this particular approach is it does not require, I mean, if in fact what we're to do is to hone our dispositions, our inclinations, our habits, if that's what we're to do, while we need to be alert to the details of the situation around us, we probably won't always be required cognitively to evaluate them against some standard. We're to rely on our intuitions, I guess, intuitions that are based on the character that we've built. Okay. That's all for today. See you next time. And be virtuous.